For those of you who may not know, we work on contemporary Armenian studies. By that, we mean post-genocide Republic of Armenia and the global diaspora. So events like these are part of the work that we do, but more importantly, supporting research on contemporary Armenian studies is a really big part of the work we do. And one of the research projects we've supported is the one by Dr. Knar Khachatryan, which she'll present today. So she's a Fulbright scholar. Susanna will tell you more about her, but we're very excited to have you here, to have talks like these, to have students come and engage, to have community and faculty come and engage. So we're very happy you guys are here. We're happy Dr. Khachatryan is here. And I'll pass it along to my colleague, Susanna Petrosian, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody to the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, and welcome Dr. Knar Khachatryan to USC. My name is Susanna Petrosian. I'm an associate director at the Institute, and we're very happy to have Dr. Khachatryan present her important talk at this important time for Armenia and Artsakh. Dr. Khachatryan is a vice provost of integration at the American University of Armenia, where she's also an associate professor of business and economics. She's an associate researcher at the Center for European Research in Microfinance as well. Her research is focused on financial inclusion, gender, poverty, and conflict studies. She's currently a visiting Fulbright scholar at Auburn University in Alabama, and we're very happy she's visiting us from there. And so she'll present her research. Please save your questions. We'll have plenty of time for question and answer after. And thank you. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Knar Khachatryan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karapetian and dear Suzanne, for making this event happen. I'm glad to meet students and guests and peer colleagues, and it's a great opportunity to interact with you all, as Suzanne mentioned, on this important topic at this important times for us Armenians. So before delving into the research project that I did with the support of the USC Armenian Institute, Armenian Studies Institute, I would like to start my presentation with some contextual background information on where we stand with the conflict of Artsakh and why, in fact, this conflict emerged. By the way, I know some of the students are in political science. In the political science literature, the conflict of Artsakh is known as one of the most complex unsolved conflicts so far. And in fact, when we zoom into the map, just to understand geographically where Artsakh, and interchangeably I'll be using Nagorno Karabakh, as this has been the name of the district during the Soviet times. So as you can see, it's a small territory, slightly more than 3,000 kilometer square, but it's 120,000 people are living here. So the nature of the conflict is not that much about the scale of the territory. It's more about the scope of complexity and the regional diversity that we have here. So you can see Armenia as it stands currently, and this is Azerbaijan, the border with Armenia. And some of the students who are not that familiar with the South Caucasus region, so there is also a tiny piece of land that currently is under Azerbaijan territory, used to be Armenian, Nakhchivan. So this small land, the small road corridor that connects Armenia with Artsakh is the Lachin corridor, right? And we'll speak about that in a bit. So this is the tiny road that connects Artsakh with Armenia and with the rest of the world. So this conflict dates back to 1988 when the Soviet Union was about to collapse, and the autonomous region, or so-called the administrative unit, the oblast, of Nagorno Karabakh, they voted to be unified with Armenia, and then later organized a nationwide referendum to become independent in 1991. So this was the kind of constitutional steps that former countries of Soviet Union were undertaking to declare their independence. So did also Nagorno Karabakh. The local Armenians, so ethnic Armenians, have been living here, and they had to, in a way, fight for their self-determination, being within the territory of the former Soviet Azerbaijan. Of course, Azerbaijan is claiming the territorial integrity and didn't recognize the steps of Nagorno-Karabakh, of them becoming independent, and the conflict escalated to become an armed conflict. And since then we have had, unfortunately, a number of armed clashes, at times of a very considerable scale with devastating outcomes. So I listed here the wars, the waves of wars we had. Unfortunately, one can't say in between we had peaceful time. Always there were small clashes. At times, on daily basis, we'll have soldiers killed on the border. So it's a very turbulent conflict and region. So this last war that started in September 2020 and lasted for 44 days, so ended on November 9th based on the three-party agreement between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. And currently we have Russian peacekeepers who are to secure the peace and be the guarantee of security for Armenians living in the territory. What we have nowadays, it has been over about 85 days that this Lachin corridor, the road that links Armenia with Artsakh, is under blockade. A group of so-called eco-activists from Azerbaijan, they closed the road, claiming they're unhappy with the mining businesses that are operating in Artsakh. On top of the road being under blockade, there have been frequent cuts of gas, electricity, internet connection has been disrupting very frequently. So that all led to a very substantial humanitarian crisis, because the free movement of people, services, and goods, all of this is stopped. End of February, the International Court of Justice ruled that Azerbaijan has to input all the measures, has to ensure that this blockade is really revealed and there is the free movement. So far, nothing has changed. So it's a very complex geopolitical situation with lots of international stakes involved. I'm not a historian or political scientist, but there are stakes from different countries involved in this tiny region that makes the situation even more complex as time goes by. So the blockade escalated on top of the humanitarian and social crisis to economic hardship. Many businesses had to either stop their operations or suspend some of their activities. So this then results into job losses and losses of income for households. I put here some recent statistics that the Artsakh Information Center shared recently. About 5,000 people are claimed to be unemployed currently after the blockade. About 20% of businesses have suspended their operations. Many students at higher educational institutions and schools, kindergartens have been affected because of interrupted educational processes. Well, the government tries to support economic and social programs, but yes, currently it's a very hard situation that we have in Artsakh. Very quickly, this snapshot, and then I'll go into the research that I did a year ago, which is a year before now, when the blockade wasn't there still. So just very quickly, the main economic sectors of Artsakh that contribute mostly to the GDP of the country: manufacturing, agriculture, construction. In a country or a zone that is under conflict, very turbulent, it's very hard to speak about numbers quantitatively, because whenever shocks happen, processes are becoming disrupted, and statistics, they in a way are mixed and confusing. But whatever the government reports, as you can see, manufacturing is one of the most contributors to the GDP, and it had quite a significant push and development in 2017. Most of those sectors are supported by public subsidies and public budget. The GDP per capita has decreased recently. And you can see the budget of Artsakh is quite small, the GDP wise. So before I go into this research that I have initiated a year ago, as it is looking at the business or strategic responses of businesses to armed conflicts or conflict operating in zones of conflict, I would like to ask students, as to you, how many armed conflicts or active conflicts, meaning cross-country wars or civil wars within a country, happened in last year or in 2020 globally? So how many armed conflicts do you think humanity has been going through over the last 2 years? Just a number,
20 plus? 12.
You were closer.
200.
Oh no! Fortunately, we're not there yet. In 2020, there is Alert International that reports on human rights and peacekeeping and all these activities. There were 34 armed conflicts, including the one in Nagorno Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in 2021, we had 32 armed conflicts globally. Now, how do you think these conflicts affect businesses? Because traditionally, we speak, whenever there are inter-country conflicts, we speak about international relations between countries, politics, or humanitarian support. This layer of business, private sector, is a bit understudied or underspoken when it comes to wars and armed conflicts. Now, how do you think conflicts affect businesses, and do they affect at all operations of businesses?
Of course.
And
In the case of Karabakh, it will influence business because Lashchenko is not only back and forth, so that's influenced very much the Karabakh question.
Yes.
If not all around there, you have conflict, Chechnya and every country there, and I'm sure they cut off with the Azeri, they cut off the road anyhow.
Yeah.
And the water.
Yes, that's one of the things that businesses are affected with when war starts. Is destroyed infrastructures, blockades of infrastructures.
So
that's
it
true.
depends on the sector, no? Some sectors might get subsidized, some sectors may make money, but mostly probably negative. But I'm sure ammunitions, they're making a lot of money, make more bullets, etc.
Yeah.
It's a war. But mostly negative, of course.
Yeah.
No incentive for investment.
Yeah. Yes. When you are living in uncertainties, of course, from business perspective, there is no reason for you to enter into new investment, innovation, or investors, international investors, they are also very reluctant to consider investing in your territory. Consumption also changes. Consumption patterns, they change. We start spending less and less because there is insecurity. If we ever can get into a normal pattern of earning, of income and all of that. So overall, yes, the moral of those questions is that violent conflicts, unfortunately, are not rare occurrences, especially nowadays. And when we speak about Artsakh, it's not just a single conflict. There are ongoing conflicts globally, and businesses are being affected. Because conflicts have devastating effects on infrastructure, the disruption of market, supply and demand, they are being disrupted, and uncertainties and the risk is being increasingly present in those territories. Now, from the business perspective, there is this term of being caught in the entrepreneurial development trap, and this is based on the similar concept of poverty trap, which I tried to put here just for us to have a basis what trap means. In the case of poverty, this means that a family that is poor, when a child is born in this family and the family can't afford education, nutrition, professional development, personal development, all of these development stages throughout the life cycle, chances are high that this person who was born in a family growing up can't find a good job, can't have decent income, and chances are high the person again continues this cycle of poverty when he or she forms a family and continues life. The same applies to the business cycle. When businesses start their operations, if they are in a conflict zone that is affected by disrupted infrastructure, supply chains are disrupted, consumption doesn't happen regularly, investment streams are not coming. So chances are high that business implication also goes so that the cycle, you are in a cyclical rhythm where you don't have incentives to innovate, to grow, and there is uncertainty from the investor side to support your activities. So the implication for businesses is that, yes, markets become smaller, businesses are functioning in an environment where the rule of law is under question at times because the state become fragile, as it's in the case of Artsakh, because we speak for something that is called de facto state, where we have very fragile regulatory setting. The country is not recognized internationally. So the rule of law is questionable. You have transaction costs that are high, as in the case of the Lachin corridor is closed. So where do businesses from Artsakh move? How do they do this? So transaction costs are really important, of course. And then it's hard to find workforce. We know that brain drain happens, and this happens especially when conflicts arise and the state is in a fragile situation. So brains are moving to better places. So it's hard to find workforce, qualified workforce. Having this in mind, so this is just to provide the context in which I did this research and worked with several companies from Artsakh to try to understand how they organize their business activities during this over the last 30 years, and especially after the war, if they have relocated their businesses to Armenia or elsewhere. So the research objective for me was to explore what is called corporate behavior of companies operating in the conflict zone. So we already fixed and defined what the conflict zone is the territory where there is ongoing war. I use here what is called the Business for Peace literature as a conceptual framework. There is this emerging literature that tries to shed light on private sector and businesses' role in peace building. peace building that traditionally is known as the area for international politics, but there is this term of track 2 diplomacy, business to business diplomacy, that can help in peace building. So this is a very emerging literature, business for peace. So I use that to lay the ground for my research in understanding business operations during the conflict of Artsakh, and in the aftermath of 2020 war, what kind of strategic shifts they made. This is the conceptual framework. What I do, first of all, I'm digging into companies' mission and understanding how their government structure is organized. Because what the literature says is that in the conflict zone, companies, even though they're conventional companies, like for-profit companies, their mission is altered. Consciously, unconsciously, but their mission is altered. And I'll just an example. For instance, if we look at this continuum of, economic or financial, say, outcomes, and then social outcomes, or the mission of the business. If traditionally companies, they are born with the objective to earn money, to make profit, as many businesses are in the lucrative industry. And on the other side of the continuum, we have this like NGOs or social enterprises, what we call, that emerge to create impact on the society. Rather than earning profit. So that's not the mission why they are born, this reason of existence. In the times of conflicts, what the research and evidence shows from different geographic zones, like from Iraq, from Kosovo, so traditional businesses, they become kind of semi-hybrid, which is like here, in between financial and social objectives. So they no longer strive to make so much profit, but they strive to keep up their businesses for creating jobs for the community, for preserving cultural and social identities, for helping soldiers, for instance. So a number of social corporate activities arise that aren't part of the mission of the business as they emerged in the beginning. But this is how the transformation happens, in fact. So I'm looking first at this aspect, trying to explore with businesses what is their motivation as they started and as they continue their operations, and also the style of the leadership in companies. If you have done any management or business course, you know that leadership styles differ. Some are positive, meaning the leadership is very much involved in the other layers of the company. They help with positive attitude to interact with employees and enter into different aspects of the business rather than just be top-down manager. So as I explore this, then my objective is to see, depending on the type of mission and type of the governance of the company, what kind of building blocks these companies have that can impact the peace in this conflict zone and keep them up with their operations and their mission to grow. And is the mission to grow or is the mission to survive? That's the other thing. So this is what is retained from the Business for Peace literature, because what the literature says is that companies that are operating in conflict zones, they create a sense of community and social cohesion. it's important for them to have the rule of law, which means international standards in a country like UN human rights or international labor standards, principles that are adopted by the country can help their operations run smoothly, because this kind of creates signal for quality and guarantee. And collective interactions, meaning if companies come together in different unions to act collectively, or if there are NGOs in these conflict zones that help society, consumers and businesses keep up with their operations. So those are the three things I explore and try to assess the relevance or the impact of those activities on companies' further growth. Skip this part quickly. So methodology-wise, again, very quickly, since there is a problem of consistent data and standardized data, this kind of studies are very hard to be to be done in a quantitative manner. So we rescue rather to the inductive approach of the research. You may know there are two approaches to the research. You either deduce, you have the theory, you have the data, you put your hypothesis, you torture a bit the data and you have some outcome. In this case, it's an induction where I have the theories and I try to find common patterns within the cases that I explore to come up with certain hypotheses and suggestions to form a theory. So it's a different approach. And as a means of collecting data, I'm using cases. 4 companies as cases are selected, and I do comparison in between and across cases. So I did in-depth expert interviews with companies, and yes, I have to say that it took me quite long to collect the data. It's not because it was hard or people were reluctant, it's because the turbulences all the time happening. I started in August 2022, and since then, yes, in September we had the Armenian Azerbaijan war happening in Armenia, in the borders of Armenia. And then there was also the case in Artsakh where the troops of Azeri invaded, and again there was a small clash. So all the time there were uncertainties and things happening that would interrupt the process of data collection, because of course businesses are not primarily there to work with academia, but they do their work. Maybe, yeah, that's just more of the research nature type of information, but this is the period I collected the data. There were some conditions that companies have to kind of comply with so that they are considered as part of my sample, and this is the as students, you may know that in statistics we have 2 types of sampling: probability sampling and non-probability. So I couldn't go after probability because you don't have that luxury of many data. So it's rather purposeful, which means I have my own objective, and based on my objective I choose which companies to target. And apart from interviews with businesses, I also worked a lot with some public entities like the Ministry of Economy in Armenia, because they have done a number of support activities to businesses in Artsakh, so I got the list from them. I worked with Artsakh Investment Fund, again to try to identify companies who were affected by the war. And at our university we have the Turpanjan Rural Development Program that has a regional entity in Artsakh. So this helped me to do the data triangulation. Now, yes, this is the list of companies, and then if you have questions later, I can come back to this to discuss which industries I tapped on. In terms of results, very quickly, yes, I could confirm that the mission of the companies that I worked with and studied initially is the conventional business operations, like being there to earn profit. But over time, as all the conflict development is happening, businesses, for them it was clear that the social, cultural, and other non-financial objectives are the driving forces that keep them in the business. And this is channeled through creating jobs for the community. There were even clusters. The business was a cluster for a couple of villages. The business was the source of income for all the households. So the founder was feeling responsible. He said, if I decide not to continue my business, I am responsible for about 20 households. So I can't do that. So very quickly these boundaries of social and financial are.
What was that business, for example? Is it a market? Is it
winery?
Winery.
Yeah, and they completely relocated to Armenia because the territories they had there, vineyards and all of this is now under Azerbaijani control. Yes. So yes, and mostly the leadership style of the managers is positive, which means they are very hands-on, very interactive with their employees. There isn't this formal hierarchical division within the company. This is what you can constate. And the companies that I have been working on, they don't have any direct engagement in the negotiation of peace or at any times in the international negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So they said they never entered into this track to diplomacy thing. In terms of sense of community and social cohesion, as I mentioned, many of the companies, willing that or not, they are engaging into corporate social activities like engaging local community, local workforce creation, building local supply chains, creating their own value chains as they build the business, volunteering. When the clashes were happening, many male employees would go to the borders, take the arms, and the women employees would engage in other types of volunteering activities like sewing, the sleeping beds or making food or other type of things. Employees, in fact, of those companies don't have that much of opportunity for professional development. Because the company's mission is not, as you can, if you remember this trap, is not to develop and innovate, is to maintain. So employees are there just to exercise daily activities. Unfortunately, there isn't this thinking of forward-looking development, other than a couple of opportunities that our projects in Armenia have been running, and employees would come for some professional development activities. So none of the companies had any formal code of conduct or kind of dispute settlement. And there were no formal discussions or trainings or courses that relate to peace building or discussion of conflict. So the businesses were very frank that they don't want to bring this tension into the company. We all know that, yes, we strive for peace, we want to live in peace, but there aren't any formal discussions or trainings on peace building or the conflict. And the rule of law. So companies state that the support system in Artsakh is quite substantial, in the sense that businesses don't face any problems of like transparency or as they call it, corruption risks, all of that, because they think that the public sector is quite transparent, and it fosters business development rather than hinders it. However, they noted also that in Armenia, public support is stronger, resources are more for businesses, and of course, those businesses that are exporting, they have their legal representation in Armenia. They can survive without that. And the last point on collective interactions, well, in Artsakh, companies rarely work with international entities like USAID or Swedish international agency, SIDA. They said those international agencies don't have their presence. They are not allowed to have their formal entities in Artsakh. And some NGOs or civil society organizations that come to Artsakh, they basically are located in the capital, not going in depth into remote rural regions. So companies that were from regions or from rural areas, villages, they didn't have to interact with the international companies. And yes, it was stated that there is this organic connection with Armenia. Without Armenia, businesses couldn't over this 30 years, the past 30 years, develop and survive. And in particular, after the war, there is the need for Armenia and the support from the Armenian government for the business development. So just to conclude, the results of my study confirm that yes, the company mission and governance, it quite relates and leads to the formation of business activities, and the role of business to make peace is even more important in the conflict zone. So I could confirm that, for instance, indirect approaches of enhancing or empowering employees or creating CSR activities, this is what keeps company going on. And also the rule of law, when the legal system or regulatory system in a country is quite present and supportive to companies. So this collective interactions wasn't that much of importance, or not importance, but it is not the case of Artsakh. We don't have international partners or international investors involved in the region. And as we speak about business growth, it's not more growth, but rather survival mode that companies are in the conflict zone. And what helps them to keep up this survival mode is legal presence in Armenia, having the connection, being flexible in their mindset and in their business strategic development, flexible because very often changes happen and they have to be flexible enough to cope with the changes. And yes, the more the region is stable, the better expectations or perspectives of business development are there. And yes, just to conclude that, again, without presence in Armenia, over the last 30 years, the businesses couldn't economically exist and do business, especially after the 2020 war. The dependence and ties on and with Armenia have become more substantial. At the time I was talking to the businesses, this was end of the last interview I did was in January. The blockade hasn't yet started, so businesses were determined, though many of them have already substantially reallocated their activities to either Armenia or other countries like Kazakhstan or Russia. And to conclude, again, businesses that operate in a conflict zone, even though their mission is by default to earn and to make profit, they undergo substantial changes in their mission and become semi-hybrid enterprises. With very outspoken social agenda. In the case of Artsakh, there weren't any direct impacts of business operations on peacemaking and engagement in negotiations, international negotiations. However, the indirect and long-term effects remain further to be explored because there is much still that we have to study and understand. So as we have more understanding about business responses to conflict, we can better contribute to policy making, and that policy is not only about international agents or at the level of politics, but it's also about business operations and making peace by doing business. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions and discuss further the aspects. Thank you. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the other three
Businesses,
that you used
Yeah,
in your research?
sure. I'll use this table. So I had one winery, wine company. Oh, sorry. Yeah. The other one, again, beverages. It's quite an old company. Yeah, the oldest in my data set. Carpets and rugs. And the last one is oil and grain production. So I didn't choose to study service companies. It's manufacturing, because manufacturing and agriculture, they constitute a substantial part of the country's economic structure. And when you have manufacturing and wars and all the conflicts, they affect more, because you have facilities, plants, production processes, supply chain is different than in the case of service. So my data is mostly from manufacturing businesses.
What you're talking now is what happened the last 5 years. We haven't talked about government, people in government before. What's that?
The good thing for us who researchers in the academics, we don't, at least me, that I'm in business and economics.
Your research was how far?
So I did, yes, with the businesses that I talked, my time span was, no, I don't speak about government. So what I was telling is the beauty is that I can decide to focus only on business operations. I don't talk about government politics. The Lachin case wasn't, at that time, the corridor wasn't under blockade, no. Yeah.
So are these, other than the winery, are the other three still, I mean, I see that the number of employees has decreased, but they're still working as far as you know?
So this one is relocated completely to Armenia. They are operating from Armenia, so they don't have any, even though there is connection with Artsakh, but the business is 100% in Armenia. Their factory is still in Artsakh. They have also one small or two small plants in Artsakh for carpet. And when I was doing the interview with this owner, he was about to relocate his business not to Armenia, but other countries of the region, thinking that no longer he could survive and develop it. So to go back to your question, yes, they have still, but I don't have updates what happened after the blockade, if they changed their minds and if they have any further relocation happening. Some of the plants, the production plants of this company, for instance, were also affected because sushi, they had warehouses and production plants also in sushi. So what this manager was sharing with me is that when the war was happening, they were planning to move all their warehouses and production to sushi, thinking that this is the safest place. And by no means, even if some other cities could be taken, sushi is the safest place. He was never thinking that they would end up leaving all the inventories they had in sushi, not taking any single supply from the factory, and moving to Stepanakert. They are now in Stepanakert. So that was very.
I had two questions, but for your fourth case, you said Marduni region. Was there anything tied to maybe a loss of the lowlands after the war, where they may have grown more grain? Where were the operations in previous Armenian villages or in the lowlands that are now on the Azeri side?
So this business is this is one of the branches of the business. The company is larger. They have this kind of conglomerate, different types of activities. They try to build synergies between business activities and create their own value chains. The reason why, one of the reasons the owners mentioned they want to relocate is that it's hard for them to find manpower, qualified people to work on the production, because grain or oil production is very special and typical thing. You need to have experts, and also the machinery that's not there, and the investment can't happen if you don't strive for profit. So I think they also had invitation from other countries to export this know-how. So that was the trend.
My second question is about banking, and if banking has become financial transactions, how much of the role does Armenia's banking system have in maintaining like Artsakh, like Artsakh's banking system in post-war, post-2020 war?
I haven't had any banking businesses that I studied, but
their own
after the war, yes, there was a substantial budget approved to help Artsakh even more with infrastructure building, investments, and all of this. I don't know, I'm not aware of any particular bank-to-bank sector investments. Yeah, I wouldn't give you any precise information on that.
How does, when the company relocates, if they relocate, do employees and families move with them? And how does that...
Yeah, very good question. The winery that moved completely, and this was the person who would say, I feel responsible for all these households that were in my village and in our local community, to provide them with employment, because most of their lands were taken by Azerbaijan. These people have migrated to Armenia, and in Yerevan, they live in a neighborhood, all of them, and most of the people are, still employed by him. So he says, as far as I can, to the extent possible, I try to keep my employees in the business, because, I feel responsible for their social and economic situation.
Also, in the case, for example, if something is in Stepanakert and then moves to Yerevan, does that lead to an exodus from Artsakh because a certain company decides to move?
Not sure if I understand the question.
So in that case, it's because the lands were taken, right, and they moved. But if, let's say, in Stepanakert, a business decides to shut down and move into Yerevan or Armenia, does that lead to
local perception? If they interesting thing, yes, because I haven't worked from Artsakh, so these businesses that I interviewed with, they were all in Armenia, Yerevan, so I could work with them. It's interesting to tap on also perception from there. Even though, but one thing to say, the businesses either started working more intensively with Armenia or elsewhere. It doesn't mean that they were cutting their ties with Artsakh. No, they were still very much engaged in the life and economy and business. So they all maintained their operations and activities. So at times, if I would call them to do the fixed interviews, many of them will be in Artsakh, even though all the activities, their business are happening in Yerevan. So they still keep, but I think the government also and the public sector, they for the sake of fairness, they know that it's hard and close to impossible to maintain a business if you are under this violent and turbulent conditions.
At some point you talked about growth versus survival, and to me it seemed like a much larger metaphor for the Armenian experience, that we're constantly stuck between survival and growth, or survival and cultivation, or survival and thriving. Are those always mutually exclusive in your world, in business and economics? If you are fighting for survival, which makes you more flexible and resilient, is there an upside in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation and resilience, or that may be, temporarily, but in the long run, no one's going to survive in turbulence, right? So how does that work? Are they always mutually exclusive, or are companies in conflict zones sometimes unicorns, right? Because they're so flexible and because they're so forced to constantly refashion themselves.
Yes, very interesting. Of course, from one conflict zone to other, things change. As I looked at the example of Iraq war and the businesses there, and then Kosovo and other conflicts, depending on the region and all the involved resources, parties, things change. For the case of Artsakh, unfortunately, I can't constate that the survival mode benefits to the growth of companies. I wouldn't say those are mutually exclusive, but there is trade-off, a great deal of trade-off in terms of decision making and the path you take. Yes, it makes them resilient. The entire culture becomes more cohesive. They are together, employees and the managers. There isn't this formal structures and distances between people. But if you look from economic and business perspective, there are lots of lost opportunities. Now, if we think in terms of, yes, the conflict will end and you have very strong unit and culture, yes, but the pace goes faster. Productivity is thing that you can't ensure if your scales are small, and even if, yes, the market opens up and the war ends, it's very hard to secure funds and to be competitive in internationally, even not locally. So yeah, it's a good question if it's mutually exclusive. I would say lots of trade-offs. Yeah.
Knar, that was my question. For Artsakh, these might be small or what have you, but in my mind, these are mid-sized companies for Artsakh.
Yes.
So how about the small mom-and-pop restaurants, hotels, markets, and everyone is ready to help the minute the road opens. I think it will open. We have always persevered, we'll persevere again. But when it does open, money's ready to flow. Goods are ready to be transported, but how will the mom and pops, I'm sure hotels are closed right now, restaurants are closed. In my mind, those are sometimes these take, like you said, conglomerate or corporate backing. Those are the mom and pop businesses that are the backbone of our communities. So I'm wondering where that's going.
Yeah, most of those small businesses, family-owned, self-employed, yes, they do struggle, and currently under the blockade. The statistics from the Artsakh Information Center, about 10% of businesses being suspended or shut down. Mostly those are the small businesses like grocery stores because there is no supply, cafes, restaurants because people don't have means and mood to go out, and hotels, no tourist flows. Yes,
hopefully they're flexible and ready to come back.
The government supports now. Government tries to refund some expenses, like instead of laying off employees, they put under furlough, so they pay some salaries to keep up the income.
Where's the government getting their money? If there's no production, there's no tourism.
Yeah, they get help from Armenia, of course, they do. Yeah.
The money come from Armenia.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's any. If not, I'll ask the last question.
Knar, you mentioned about there not being sort of any business-to-business cooperation with Azerbaijan, but there's literature sort of that supports that in conflict zones. What are do you see any future possibilities of that. I mean, it's hard to think about that right now at the moment, but that's something that eventually may have to sort of come into play, right? Do you see any possibilities or any ways of sort of that coming into being?
I ask this question when talking to businesses if they ever consider within their supply chain to have any part like raw materials or any components coming from Azerbaijan or trading with their counterparts. The businesses are quite firm that for the time being they don't want to engage into any interaction, and that's interesting because I have also been working on Armenia-Turkey business trade and on international trade. In there, interestingly enough, even though we don't have diplomatic ties, close border, but trade with Turkey is happening and it's substantial. And we have Armenian businesses with their counterparts from Turkey, and they claim there is trust between them, even though international law is not there. They have no guarantee, we have no embassy, all of this. But business to business trust and interactions, they happen, and they are substantial. Even after the war, we had small suspension and kind of embargo when the war was going on the import. But after that, again, businesses started to interact. So it's quite different from Azerbaijan and Artsakh Azerbaijan business relations. It's in the short run, at least, I couldn't sense any interest and trust among businesses to work with their Azerbaijani counterparts.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming here, and we hope to see you again at a future event.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.